Chapter 82. I painted a map to the gravesite using the ash mixture and a feather from the owl. Mother's absence left a gaping hole, a mouth missing its front tooth. The eternal grayness in camp became a shade darker. Amidst the polar night, our only sun had slipped under a cloud. "We could drown ourselves," said the bald man. "That would be easy, right?" No one responded. "Don't ignore me, girl." "I'm not ignoring you, don't you understand? We're all tired of you," I said. And I was so very tired. Mentally, physically, emotionally. I was tired. "You always talk of death and of us killing ourselves, but haven't you figured it out? We're not interested in dying," I said. "But I'm interested," he insisted. "Maybe you don't really want to die. Maybe you just think you deserve to," said Jonas. The bald man looked up at Jonas and then at me. "You think of nothing but yourself. If you want to kill yourself, what's keeping you?" I said. Silence sat between our stares. "Fear," he said. 2 nights after we buried Mother, there was a whistle on the air. A storm would arrive the next day. I bundled in all that I could find and set out into the blackness to steal wood from the NKVD building. Each day when chopping and delivering wood, we dumped extra behind the pile. It was understood that if someone was brave enough to steal it, it was there. A man in Group 26 got caught stealing wood. They sentenced him to an additional 5 years. 5 years for 1 log. It could have been 50. Our sentences were dictated by our survival. I walked toward the NKVD barrack, making a wide circle to arrive at the back, close to the woodpile. My face and ears were wrapped in a cloth with only my eyes exposed. I wore Mother's hat. A figure scurried past me carrying a large plank of wood. Brave. The planks were leaned up against the barracks. I turned near the back of the woodpile. I stopped. A figure in a long coat stood behind the giant stacks of wood. It was impossible to see in the darkness. I turned slowly to leave, trying not to make a sound. "Who's there? Show yourself." I turned around. "Group number?" he demanded. 11, I said, backing away. The figure moved closer. "Vilkas?" I didn't respond. He stepped toward me, and I saw his eyes under the large fur hat. Kretsky. He stumbled, and I heard swishing. He carried a bottle. "Stealing?" he asked, taking a swig. I said nothing. "I can't arrange for you to draw a portrait here. No one wants one," said Kretsky. "You think I want to draw for you?" "Why not? It kept you warm, you got food, and you drew a nice realistic portrait." He laughed. Realistic? I don't want to be forced to draw that way. Why was I even talking to him? I turned to leave. "Your mother," he said. I stopped. "She was a good woman. I could see she used to be very pretty." I spun around. "What do you mean? She was always pretty. It's you that's ugly. You couldn't see her beauty, or anyone else's for that matter." "No, I saw it. She was pretty. Krisvaya." No, not that word. I was supposed to learn it on my own, not from Kretsky. "It means beautiful, but with strength," he slurred. "Unique." I couldn't look at him. I looked at the logs. I wanted to grab one. I wanted to smash him across the face like the can of sardines. "So, you hate me," he laughed. How could Mother have tolerated Kretsky? She claimed he had helped her. "I hate me too," he said. I looked up. "You want to draw me like this? Like your beloved Munch?" His face looked puffy. I could barely understand his slurred Russian. "I know about your drawings." He pointed a shaky finger at me. "I've seen them all." He knew about my drawings. "How did you know about my father?" I asked. He ignored my question. "My mother, she was an artist too," he said, gesturing with the bottle, "but she is with yours, dead." "I'm sorry," I said instinctively. Why did I say that? I didn't care. "You're sorry?" He snorted in disbelief, tucking the bottle under his arm and rubbing his gloves together. "My mother, she was Polish. She died when I was 5. My father is Russian. He married a Russian when I was 6. My mother wasn't even cold a year." Some of my mother's relatives are in Kolyma. I was supposed to go there to help them. That's why I wanted to leave the barge in Jakutsk, but now I'm here, so you're not the only one who is in prison." He took another long swig of the bottle. "You want to steal wood, Vilkas?" He opened his arms. "Steal wood!" Waved his hand toward the pile. "Divide!" My eyes burned. My eyelids stung from the cold. I walked to the woodpile. "The woman my father married, she hates me too. She hates Poles." I took a log. He didn't stop me. I began to pile wood. I heard a sound. Kretsky's back was turned and the bottle hanging from his hand. Was he sick? I took a step away with the logs, and I heard it again. Kretsky wasn't sick. He was crying. "Leave, Lena. Hurry. Take the wood. Just go," I told myself. I took a step to leave him. Instead, my legs walked toward him, still holding the wood. What was I doing? The sound coming from Kretsky was uncontrollable, stifled. "Nikolai." He didn't look at me. I stood there, silent. "Nikolai." I reached out from under the wood. I put a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," I finally said. We stood in the darkness, saying nothing. I turned to leave him. "Vilkas." I turned. "I'm sorry for your mother," he said. I nodded. "Me too." Chapter 83. I had played through scenarios of how I would get back at the NKVD, how I would stomp on the Soviets if I ever had a chance. I had a chance. I could have laughed at him, thrown wood at him, spit in his face. The man threw things at me, humiliated me. I hated him, right? I should have turned and walked away. I should have felt good inside. But I didn't. The sound of his crying physically pained me. What was wrong with me? I told no one of the incident, and the next day, Kretsky was gone. February arrived. Janina was fighting scurvy. The man who owned his watch had dysentery. Mrs. Remus and I tended to them as best we could. Janina spoke to her dead dolly for hours, sometimes yelling or laughing. After a few days, she stopped speaking. "What are we to do?" "Janina's getting sicker by the minute," I told Jonas. He looked at me. "What is it?" I said. "I have the spots again," he said. "Where? Let me see." The scurvy spots had reappeared on Jonas's stomach. Clumps of his hair had fallen out. "There are no tomatoes this time," said Jonas. "Andrus isn't here." He started shaking his head. I grabbed my brother by the shoulders. "Jonas, listen to me. We're going to live. Do you hear me? We're going home. We're not going to die. We're going home to our house, and we're going to sleep in our beds with the Goosetown comforters. We will, all right?" "How will we live alone, without Mother and Papa?" he asked. "Auntie and Uncle and Joanna, they'll help. We have Auntie's apple cakes and donuts with jam inside. The ones you'd like, okay? And Andrus will help us." Jonas nodded. "Say it. Say, we're going home." "We're going home," repeated Jonas. I hugged him, kissing the scabbed bald spot on his head. "Here." I took the stone from Andrus out of my pocket and held it up to Jonas. He seemed dazed and didn't take the stone. My stomach sank. What would I do? I had no medicine. Everyone was ill. Would I be the only one left, alone with the bald man? We took turns going for rations. I begged at other yurtas as Mother had done on the beet farm. I walked into a yurta. 2 women sat amongst 4 people who were covered as if sleeping, but they were all dead. "Please, don't tell. We want to bury them once the storm ends. If the NKVD discover they're dead, they'll throw them out into the snow." "I won't tell," I assured them. The storm raged, and the sound of the wind echoed between my stinging ears. The wind blew so cold like white fire. I fought my way back to our yurta. Bodies stacked like firewood were covered in snow outside the huts. The man who owned his watch hadn't returned. "I'll go look for him," I said to Mrs. Remus. "He could barely walk," said the bald man. "He probably went to the closest yurta when the winds came. Don't risk it." "We have to help one another," I told him. But how could I expect him, of all people, to understand? "You need to stay here. Jonas is not well." Mrs. Remus looked over to Janina. "Her mother?" I asked. "I took her to the typhus hut," whispered Mrs. Remus. I sat next to my brother. I rearranged the rags and fishing nets he was covered with. I'm so tired, Lena. My gums hurt and my teeth ache. I know. As soon as the storm ends, I'll search for some food. You need fish. There's plenty of it in barrels. I just need to steal some. I'm so cold, said Jonas, shivering, and I can't straighten my legs. I heated chunks of brick and put them under his feet. I took a brick to Janina. Scurvy bruising spotted her face and neck. The tip of her tiny nose was black with frostbite. I kept the fire going. It did little to help. I could use only a small amount of wood to save what we had. I didn't know how long this storm would last. I looked at the empty spot where my mother had lain. Janina's mother, the man who wound his watch, the repeater. Large gaps had appeared on the floor of the yurta. I lay next to Jonas, covering him with my body as we had done for Mother. I wrapped my arms around him, holding his hands in mine. The wind slapped against our disintegrating yurta. Snow blew in around us. It couldn't end like this. It couldn't. What was life asking of me? How could I respond when I didn't know the question? I love you, I whispered to Jonas.